The last thing my daughter said before she locked me out of my own house was, "Mom, you signed it. This house belongs to us now." I stood on my front porch with a single suitcase beside me, staring at the door my husband and I had painted together 35 years earlier. My son-in-law folded his arms as if he had owned the place his entire life, while my daughter refused to look me in the eye. I was 69 years old, widowed, and suddenly homeless. They said I had willingly transferred the deed. They said my memory was failing. For 2 weeks, I almost believed them. Then I walked into the county recorder's office, looked at the paperwork, and asked one question that changed everything. Who signed David Price's name? If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, I'd truly like to hear your thoughts as this story unfolds. Please take a moment to like and subscribe if stories like mine speak to you. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment telling me how you would react in my situation, along with where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Sometimes knowing we're not alone makes all the difference. I used to believe that a house remembers the people who love it. Even now, after everything that happened, I still think walls absorb voices, kitchens hold laughter, and front porches remember every goodbye. My husband David and I bought our house on Willow Creek Road in Greenville, South Carolina 35 years ago. It wasn't much to look at back then. The paint was peeling. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The front yard was mostly dirt and weeds. The previous owners had abandoned it after a divorce, and the bank wanted to get rid of it quickly. Everyone told us we were making a mistake. David smiled the entire drive home after signing the papers. "We finally have our own place, Erin," he said. "Nobody can take this from us." At the time, we were both working long hours. I had a job at the county library while David worked construction 6 days a week. Money was tight. Some months, we had to choose between replacing broken appliances and paying medical bills. But David had strong hands and endless patience. Every weekend, he repaired something. He rebuilt the front steps. He replaced the kitchen cabinets. He laid hardwood floors, one board at a time. He planted the maple tree that still stands beside the driveway. When our daughter Melissa was born, he painted her bedroom pale yellow, because he said every little girl deserved sunshine, even on rainy days. For years, our home became the center of our lives. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school pictures, family dinners, arguments, laughter, silence. Everything happened inside those walls. Melissa learned to ride her bicycle in our driveway. She baked cookies beside me every December. She sat at the kitchen table doing homework while David helped her with math. There was a time when I truly believed our family was unbreakable. Perhaps every mother believes that. David adored Melissa. She was his entire world. When she was 16 and wrecked his truck, he hugged her before he looked at the damage. When she failed her first year of college, he drove 4 hours just to bring her home. When she married Brian Carter, David wasn't completely comfortable with him, but he smiled for every wedding picture. "He makes her happy," he told me. At least, that was what he wanted to believe. Brian worked in real estate. He talked fast, dressed well, and always seemed to have big plans. He was charming around strangers and polite at family dinners. But David often watched him quietly. One evening, years before he died, David sat beside me on the back porch. "I don't think Brian understands the value of things," he said. "What do you mean?" "He knows the price of everything. That's different." I didn't understand what he meant back then. I wish I had. David retired at 63. 2 years later, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Nothing prepares you for hearing the person you've loved for 40 years receive a death sentence. The strongest man I had ever known suddenly became smaller. The man who built our house struggled to climb the stairs. The hands that repaired everything began to tremble. For 18 months, we fought the disease together. Chemotherapy, doctor visits, hospital rooms, long nights. short conversations. There were good days. There were terrible days. Near the end, David spent most afternoons sitting in his recliner beside the living room window. He liked watching the birds at the feeder he had installed years earlier. One evening, only a few weeks before he died, he asked me to sit beside him. The house was quiet. Melissa had already gone home. Rain tapped against the windows. David reached for my hand. "Promise me something." I smiled. "You know I will." He looked toward the hallway that led to our bedroom. "Never let anyone pressure you into signing papers you don't understand." I laughed softly. "What papers?" "Any papers." His voice had become weak. "This house protects you. When I'm gone, this place keeps you safe." I squeezed his hand. "You aren't going anywhere." But both of us knew that wasn't true. He continued. "People change when money gets involved." I remember feeling almost offended. Melissa would never hurt me. He closed his eyes. "I hope you're right." David died 6 weeks later. The funeral felt like living inside a dream I didn't want to remember. People filled our home with casseroles, flowers, and sympathy. Then gradually, everyone returned to their own lives. The silence afterward was the hardest part. For the first time in 40 years, I ate breakfast alone. I slept alone. I made coffee for one person. The house suddenly felt much larger. Some evenings, I would sit in David's chair and imagine hearing his truck pull into the driveway. Grief plays tricks on older people. Or maybe it simply refuses to let go. Melissa visited often during the first year. She brought groceries. She helped with repairs. She called every Sunday. I was grateful. Sometimes she brought Lily, my granddaughter. Lily would sit beside me and ask questions about her grandfather. What was Grandpa like? What was his favorite song? Did he really build the deck himself? Those conversations kept David alive. As time passed, Melissa's visits became less frequent. She was busy. Work. Bills. Life. I understood. I never wanted to become a burden. At 69, I had my routines. Every morning I walked through the neighborhood. I volunteered twice a week at the library. I attended church on Sundays. I watered David's flowers. I spoke to his photograph before bed. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was peaceful. And the house still felt like him. Every nail, every cabinet, every floorboard. Sometimes I would stand in the kitchen and hear his voice. "Did you lock the back door, Erin? Don't forget the tomatoes. Coffee's ready." People say homes are only buildings. They're wrong. Some homes become witnesses. Some become guardians. Some become the last place where love still lives. One afternoon, almost 8 years after David's death, I opened my front door and found Melissa standing there. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were red. Brian stood behind her. Lily carried 2 suitcases. The moment I saw my daughter crying, my heart immediately broke. "Mom," she whispered. And before she even finished speaking, I already knew she needed something. I just didn't know that opening my front door that day would eventually cost me nearly everything. Melissa had always cried easily. As a little girl, she cried when she lost her favorite doll. She cried when she failed a math test in 8th grade. She cried when she left for college and hugged me in the dormitory parking lot. So when I opened my front door and saw tears running down her face, my first instinct was exactly what it had always been. Protect her. "Mom, can we come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside immediately. Brian carried 2 suitcases through the doorway while Lily followed behind them holding a backpack against her chest. My granddaughter looked embarrassed, as if she didn't want to be there, but had no choice. I led everyone into the kitchen. For a few moments, nobody spoke. The clock above the stove ticked loudly. I poured coffee for Melissa and Brian and made hot chocolate for Lily. She thanked me softly and sat beside the window where David used to read the newspaper every morning. Finally, Melissa took the deep breath. "We lost the house." I felt my stomach tighten. "What happened?" Brian leaned forward. "The market slowed down. A couple investments didn't work out." Melissa wiped her eyes. "We've fallen behind on payments." "How far behind?" She hesitated. "Several months." I looked at Brian. He stared into his coffee. "We thought things would improve," he said. "They didn't." The silence that followed felt heavy. I knew they had struggled before. Brian worked in real estate, and the market had become unpredictable. Melissa had left her management job several years earlier, but I had never imagined things had become this serious. "Are you staying in a hotel?" I asked. Melissa began crying again. "No." The answer was enough. I already knew what she wanted before she said it. "Mom, could we stay here for a little while, just until we get back on our feet?" I looked toward Lily. She lowered her eyes. Brian finally spoke. "We only need a few months." A few months? Those words sounded harmless. Families help each other. At least, that's what I had always believed. I glanced toward the framed photograph sitting on the kitchen counter. David was smiling beside the fishing boat he loved. I could almost hear him asking me to be careful. But I was looking at my daughter. My only child. The little girl whose scraped knees I had bandaged. The young woman whose wedding dress I had zipped up. The mother of my granddaughter. How could I possibly say no? Of course. I said. Melissa burst into tears again and wrapped her arms around me. "Thank you, Mom." Brian stood and shook my hand. "I promise this won't be forever." I smiled. It doesn't have to be rushed. Looking back now, I often wonder if that moment changed everything. Or if things had already begun changing long before they arrived. The first few weeks actually felt wonderful. The house was alive again. Lily's laughter returned to the hallways. Melissa cooked dinner several nights each week. Brian fixed the broken fence in the backyard. For the first time in years, there were voices at breakfast. People coming and going. Television sounds. Music. Life. Some evenings we sat together on the back porch while the sun disappeared behind the trees. Melissa rested her head on my shoulder. "I missed this house," she said one evening. "So did I. I miss Dad every day." I squeezed her hand. "So do I." She began helping me around the house. She vacuumed. She grocery shopped. She drove me to church. Sometimes she insisted on paying for dinner. It felt as if my daughter had come back to me. The distance that had slowly developed after David's death seemed to disappear. Even Lily appeared happier. She spent hours in David's old workshop. She asked me stories about her grandfather. One afternoon, she found one of his toolboxes. "Did Grandpa really build the deck himself?" "He did," she smiled. "I wish I'd known him better." "So do I." There were moments during those first weeks when I believed perhaps God had sent my family back to me because I had been lonely. Perhaps this was my reward for surviving grief. Perhaps life was giving me another chance. But little things began happening. Very small things. Things that seemed unimportant. Brian asked questions. Many questions. "When was the roof replaced? Do you still owe money on the mortgage? How much are property taxes around here? Have you updated your insurance?" At first, I assumed he was simply making conversation. After all, real estate had been his profession. Still, sometimes his questions felt oddly specific. One afternoon, he sat beside me at the kitchen table. "This neighborhood has become pretty valuable." I laughed. "You sound like a realtor." He smiled. Old habits. A few days later, I found him studying the property tax paperwork that had arrived in the mail. "Oh, I'm sorry," he said. "I thought it was ours." Ours? The word stayed with me. Melissa also began bringing up financial topics, very casually, very gently. "Mom, have you ever thought about making a trust? You should probably update your paperwork. What happens if you ever need assisted living?" I usually change the subject. "I'm healthy." "I know. But it's good to plan ahead." One Sunday after church, she drove me home and said something that made me uncomfortable. "A lot of older people lose their homes because they don't prepare." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" "If they get sick or go into nursing care." "I don't plan to." "No one plans to." Her voice sounded kind, concerned. Yet something inside me felt uneasy. That night I sat in David's recliner. The house was quiet. Everyone had gone to bed. I looked toward his photograph. I remembered his words. "Never let anyone pressure you into signing papers you don't understand." I felt guilty for even thinking about it. Melissa was my daughter. She had done nothing wrong. She was helping me. She cooked meals. She cleaned the house. She spent time with me. Brian repaired things around the property. Lily filled the house with life. What kind of mother becomes suspicious of her own child? The next morning, Melissa made pancakes. Brian joked with Lily. Everyone laughed. The uncomfortable feeling disappeared, for a while. But several days later, I walked into the living room unexpectedly. Brian was standing beside David's old filing cabinet. He quickly closed one of the drawers. "Oh, I was looking for batteries." The batteries were in the kitchen. He knew that. I knew that. Neither of us said anything. That evening I opened the cabinet myself. Inside were years of paperwork, insurance documents, tax records, bank statements, and the original folder containing our house documents. The folder was slightly out of place. I stared at it for a long time. Then I carefully pushed it back exactly where it belonged. Outside my bedroom door, I heard footsteps. Someone was standing in the hallway. When the floor creaked, the footsteps moved away. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. But looking back, I think that was the first moment I truly became afraid. Not because someone had touched the papers, but because for the first time in my life, I felt like a guest inside my own home. The first time Brian mentioned nursing homes, we were sitting around my kitchen table on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Melissa was making chicken soup. Lily was upstairs doing homework. The television played softly in the living room. Everything seemed ordinary. Brian folded the local newspaper and pointed to an article. "Did you see this?" I adjusted my glasses. The article discussed rising costs at assisted living facilities. "Some places charge $8,000 or $9,000 a month now," he said. I shrugged. "That's terrible." Melissa placed bowls on the table. "A lot of seniors lose everything." I looked up. "What do you mean?" She sat beside me. "The government can take your assets if you end up needing long-term care." I frowned. "I don't think that's exactly how it works." Brian leaned back. "It happens more often than people realize." I had never spent much time worrying about such things. My retirement income covered my expenses. I had Medicare. My health was reasonably good. I walked every morning and still volunteered at the library twice a week. The idea of a nursing home felt very far away. Still, Brian continued. "A lot of people protect their homes by transferring ownership before something happens." Melissa nodded. "It's called planning." The conversation moved on after that. But over the following weeks, similar discussions began appearing more often. At breakfast, while driving to church, during dinner, always casually, always kindly. One Saturday morning, Melissa accompanied me to the grocery store. As we loaded bags into the car, she said quietly, "Mom, have you ever updated your will since Dad died?" "No." "You probably should." "I suppose." She looked out the windshield. "I just worry about you." I smiled. "I'm still here." "I know. But things happen." Her voice sounded sincere. That was what made everything so confusing. Nothing felt aggressive. Nothing felt threatening. Instead, every conversation came wrapped in concern, wrapped in love, wrapped in fear. And fear can be very persuasive. Several days later, Brian brought home a stack of brochures. He spread them across the kitchen table. Living trusts, estate planning, asset protection, long-term care planning. He pointed at diagrams and charts. "If something happened to you unexpectedly, probate could take months." I barely understood the terminology. David had always handled financial matters. After he died, I simply continued paying bills the same way we always had. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, property taxes. The house had been fully paid off 3 years earlier. To me, that meant security. To Brian, it seemed to mean opportunity. One evening after dinner, he said something that made me uncomfortable. "You know, if the house were already in Melissa's name, nobody could touch it." I stared at him. "What do you mean, nobody?" "Nursing homes, lawsuits, medical bills." Melissa quickly added, "He's just talking about planning." I folded my napkin. "The house belongs to me." "Of course it does." Brian smiled. "I'm only talking about protecting it." Protecting it. The word sounded innocent, but every time I heard it, I remembered David. Never let anyone pressure you into signing papers you don't understand. I found myself thinking about him more often. At night, I would sit in his recliner and imagine what he would say. Would he trust Brian? Would he believe Melissa? Or would he see something I could not? One Sunday after church, I visited my friend Carol Benson. Carol had lived 3 houses away for nearly 20 years. She had been beside me during David's illness and funeral. She knew my family well. We sat on her back porch drinking iced tea. "How's having everyone home?" she asked. "Good." I hesitated. "Mostly." She raised an eyebrow. "Mostly." I laughed softly. "I think Brian worries too much about my finances." "What kind of finances?" "The house." Carol became quiet. "What about it?" "He keeps talking about protecting it." She looked directly at me. "Have they asked you to sign anything?" "No." "Good." I smiled. "You sound suspicious." She shrugged. "I'm old enough to be suspicious." I laughed, but her expression remained serious. "Just be careful, Erin." I changed the subject. I didn't want to discuss my daughter as if she were a stranger. Yet Carol's words stayed with me. The following week, Brian announced that he wanted me to meet someone. "A financial consultant." I frowned. "Why?" "He helps seniors organize their assets." "I don't have many assets." "You have a house." Melissa sat beside me. "Mom, it couldn't hurt." "I don't know. It's just information." Eventually, I agreed. The man arrived on a Thursday afternoon. His name was Richard. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. He spoke quickly and confidently. For nearly an hour, he explained trusts, probate taxes, and estate planning. Much of it sounded complicated. I became embarrassed because I struggled to follow his explanations. Several times, I asked him to slow down. Brian answered questions before I could. Melissa nodded beside him. At one point, Richard looked directly at me. "Have you considered transferring the property to your daughter?" "No." "Why not?" I felt uncomfortable. "Because it's my home." "Of course." He smiled politely. "But eventually, it will become hers." I looked down at my coffee cup. Eventually. The conversation ended soon afterward. After Richard left, I stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. Melissa approached quietly. "You seemed upset." "I'm just tired." "He was only trying to help." "Maybe." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "I don't want anything from you." I looked at my daughter. Her eyes appeared sincere. "I know." She hugged me. "We only want you protected." That sentence would repeat itself many times during the following months. Protected, protected, protected. Meanwhile, little changes continued happening around the house. Brian installed new locks on the garage. He reorganized the filing cabinet. He asked where important documents were stored. He wanted copies of insurance information. He offered to handle property taxes online. I politely refused. One afternoon, I entered the kitchen and discovered Brian examining a folder. He closed it immediately. "What's that?" "Insurance paperwork." "Why?" "I thought I could help." I took the folder from him. "I've handled it for years." His smile briefly disappeared. "I'm only trying to make things easier." That evening, I sat alone in my bedroom. Outside, rain tapped against the windows exactly the way it had on the night David gave me his warning. I opened my bedside drawer. Inside was our wedding photograph. I touched the frame. "I wish you were here," I whispered. The house no longer felt quite the same. Not because anyone had done something terrible, not yet, but because every conversation now seemed connected to one thing: the house, the property, the future, the ownership. And for the first time since David died, I began locking my bedroom door at night. A few days later, Melissa walked into the kitchen carrying several papers. "Mom, can we talk about something?" I looked at the stack in her hands. My stomach tightened. Because suddenly, I remembered exactly what David had said. "Never sign anything you don't understand." And for the first time, I was afraid that someone I loved might eventually ask me to do exactly that. The papers appeared 3 weeks after my 70-year-old body reminded me that I was no longer young. It happened on a cold Saturday morning. The grass behind the house was wet from overnight rain, and I had gone outside to cover David's rose bushes before temperatures dropped. I had done the same thing every winter for years, but this time, my foot slipped. I fell hard against the concrete edge of the flower bed. The pain shot through my hip and lower back. For several minutes, I couldn't stand. Melissa found me lying beside the garden. "Mom!" She dropped to her knees. Brian ran outside. Lily looked terrified. The doctor later told me nothing was broken. A severe bruise, some strained muscles, pain medication, rest. At my age, even a simple fall suddenly becomes a family emergency. For nearly 2 weeks, I spent most of my time in bed or sitting in David's recliner. Melissa brought me meals. She organized my medications. She drove me to appointments. She tucked blankets around my legs. Sometimes she sat beside me and brushed my hair exactly the way I had done for her when she was a little girl. Seeing her care for me softened my heart. Perhaps I had been unfair. Perhaps all those uncomfortable feelings were simply fear. I hated needing help. I hated moving slowly. I hated asking someone to carry laundry. And perhaps because of that, I became more willing to let Melissa make decisions. One evening, she sat beside me with a folder. "Mom, there are a few things we should probably organize while you're recovering." I adjusted my glasses. What things? Emergency paperwork. I frowned. What kind of paperwork? She spoke gently. If something happened medically, doctors need to know who can help make decisions. That sounded reasonable, I suppose. Brian entered the room carrying several sheets of paper. Nothing complicated. I looked at the stack. There were far more pages than I expected. Medical forms, information sheets, signatures, initials, legal language. My pain medication made me sleepy, and concentrating had become difficult. Melissa pointed to one page. This is medical authorization. Another page. This allows me to speak to doctors. Another. This is emergency information. I rubbed my forehead. So many papers. She smiled. It's just adult life. The next afternoon, Brian mentioned that someone would stop by. Just a notary. I looked up. A notary? For some signatures. Why? Certain forms require it. Something inside me hesitated, but Melissa immediately answered. It's only because of the medical authorization. The woman arrived shortly before dinner. Her name was Linda Foster. She appeared to be in her mid-50s and carried a black briefcase. She shook my hand. I'm sorry to hear about your fall. I smiled politely. She sat at the dining room table. The papers were already arranged. Brian handed me a pen. Whenever you're ready. I remember that evening differently every time I think about it. Some details remain perfectly clear. Others feel covered in fog. I remember the smell of chicken in the oven. I remember Lily sitting upstairs doing homework. I remember my hip hurting. I remember feeling tired. Melissa sat beside me. Brian stood behind Linda. The pages moved quickly. Sign here. Initial here. Date here. I asked questions. Some were answered. Others were brushed aside. Just routine. Nothing important. You've already discussed this. At one point, I lowered the pen. Should I read everything? Brian laughed lightly. You can if you want, but it's mostly legal wording. Melissa squeezed my hand. We're just trying to make things easier for you. Easier. That word again. I signed several pages, perhaps more, perhaps fewer. Even now, I cannot say with certainty. What I do know is that I never believed I was signing anything involving my house. Never. When everything finished, Linda gathered the papers. She smiled politely. I hope you feel better soon. And then she left. Life returned to normal, or at least it appeared to. My hip slowly improved. I walked again. I resumed volunteering. Christmas approached. The house became busy. Decorations, shopping, music, family dinners. For a while, I stopped worrying. Until one afternoon, I was looking for an old recipe card inside the kitchen drawer when I found an envelope. Inside were copies of several documents. Some carried my signature. Others did not. One page had been removed. I knew because the page numbers skipped. I looked at Melissa. Where are the rest of these? She barely looked up from her phone. I don't know. These aren't complete. Brian entered the kitchen. What aren't complete? The papers I signed. He smiled. They've already been filed. Filed where? Various places. I stared at him. What places? He opened the refrigerator. Nothing important. My stomach tightened. That night, I could not sleep. The house was silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows. I walked into David's old workshop. Everything still sat exactly where he had left it. His hammer, his work gloves, his measuring tape. I sat in his chair. On the wall hung a photograph of us standing beside the house shortly after we bought it. We looked young, hopeful, poor, happy. I suddenly remembered something. Years earlier, David had explained that both our names appeared on the deed. If either of us ever sold the property, both signatures would be required. Back then, I had barely listened. Financial matters had always been his responsibility. But now that memory returned. Both signatures, mine and David's. A strange feeling passed through me. Not fear exactly, more like uneasiness. The following morning, I decided to organize our important documents. I walked toward the filing cabinet. The lock resisted. I tried again. Nothing. Brian appeared behind me. "Oh, I changed the lock." I turned around. "You what?" The drawer wasn't closing properly. "Where's the key?" "I have it somewhere." "Why, I was helping organize things." I stared at him. Those files contained our insurance papers, tax records, bank statements, our house documents, everything. "I'd like the key." "Of course." But he did not give it to me. Later that afternoon, Lily knocked softly on my bedroom door. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetheart." She entered and closed the door behind her. She looked nervous. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." She sat beside me. "Did Mom and Dad ask you to sign house papers?" My heart suddenly began beating faster. "What do you mean?" She lowered her voice. "I heard them arguing. When? A few nights ago." "What did they say?" She hesitated. "I don't know if I should tell you." I touched her hand. "You can tell me." She looked toward the closed door. "Dad said the signatures were already done." My mouth became dry. "What signatures?" She shook her head. "I don't know." The room suddenly felt cold. Outside, I heard Brian's footsteps in the hallway. Lily stood immediately. "Please don't tell them I said anything." She left before I could ask another question. That evening during dinner, everyone behaved normally. Melissa talked about grocery prices. Brian watched television. Lily barely spoke. And I sat quietly remembering every page I had signed, every signature, every initial, every moment that I had trusted the people sitting around my table. For the first time, a terrible question entered my mind. What if the papers had never been about my health at all? And what if I had already signed away something I didn't even realize I owned? After Lily asked me about the signatures, I began paying attention to things I had ignored for months. Once you become suspicious, ordinary moments start looking different. Words sound different. Silence sounds different. Even your own house feels different. I didn't confront Melissa or Brian immediately. Part of me still hoped I was imagining everything. I wanted to believe that stress and pain medication had made me overly sensitive. After all, they were family. They had nowhere else to go. Melissa was my daughter. But small changes continued happening, and each one felt like another thread being pulled loose. One Monday morning, I sat down at my computer to pay my utility bills. The internet wouldn't connect. I checked the router. Nothing. I called out toward the kitchen. "Melissa, is the internet down?" Brian answered. "I changed the password." I looked at him. "Why?" "We upgraded the security settings." "You didn't tell me." He shrugged. "I forgot." "What is the new password?" "I'll write it down later." He never did. That evening, I asked again. Brian smiled. "I'll get it for you tomorrow." Melissa said nothing. The following day, I discovered that some of my mail had already been opened. Property tax notices, insurance information, bank correspondence. The envelopes sat neatly stacked on the kitchen counter. I held one up. Who opened this? Melissa looked uncomfortable. I thought it was ours. Ours again. That word. I placed the envelope down carefully. My mail shouldn't be opened. I'm sorry. Brian walked into the kitchen. We're only trying to help. By opening my mail. You forget things sometimes. The sentence hit me harder than I expected. I do not forget things. He raised his hands. I didn't mean anything. But I knew exactly what he meant. And perhaps he wanted me to know. A week later, I noticed that several photographs had disappeared from the living room. One picture of David and me at our 40th anniversary dinner was gone. Another family portrait had been moved to a hallway. In their place stood framed photographs of Melissa, Brian, and Lily. I carried David's photograph back into the living room. Melissa saw me. I was just reorganizing. Why? The room felt crowded. I looked at my husband's picture. This is David's house. She became quiet. No, Mom. It's your house. At the time, I didn't realize how carefully she had chosen those words. Not our house. Not your and Dad's house. Your house. As if she were already separating herself from responsibility. As if something else was coming. Meanwhile, Brian spent more and more time in the garage. David's workshop slowly disappeared. Toolboxes moved, shelves emptied. A desk appeared, 2 computer monitors, business files. One afternoon, I walked into the garage. Brian sat at the desk speaking on the phone. The equity alone could solve everything. He stopped when he saw me. I'll call you back. The room became silent. Who were you talking to? A friend. What equity? He smiled. Just business. I looked around. David's tools sat in boxes. His workbench had been pushed against the wall. The room no longer looked familiar. This used to be my husband's workshop. I'm only borrowing the space. I nodded, but inside I felt something break. The house had become divided into territories. The garage belonged to Brian. The kitchen belonged to Melissa. The upstairs belonged to Lily. Only my bedroom still felt like mine, and even that began changing. One evening, I entered my room and discovered that several drawers had been reorganized. My jewelry box had moved. Medical records had been stacked neatly. My insurance papers sat on the dresser. Melissa appeared behind me. I was helping. I turned around. Please don't go through my things. She looked hurt. I was organizing. I know where my things are. Her eyes filled with tears. I'm only trying to make life easier. I suddenly felt guilty. That was the hardest part. Every objection made me feel selfish. Every question made me feel ungrateful. Every concern became evidence that perhaps I was becoming difficult. And older people fear becoming difficult. We fear becoming burdens. We fear being called confused. One Sunday after church, Carol invited me for coffee. The moment I sat down, she studied my face. You look tired. I haven't been sleeping. What's wrong? I hesitated. Then I told her everything. The mail, the paperwork, the passwords, the conversations, the signatures. Carol listened quietly. When I finished, she folded her hands. Erin, where are your house documents? I don't know anymore. What do you mean? The cabinet is locked. Who has the key? Brian. Her expression changed. That's your cabinet. I know. No, Erin. Listen to me. Her voice became firm. Nobody should control your papers except you. I stared at my coffee cup. I don't want to accuse my daughter. You don't have to accuse anyone. What do I do? Get your documents. The simplicity of her answer surprised me. That evening, I returned home determined to retrieve the key. Brian sat in the living room. I need the filing cabinet key. He barely looked up. I'll find it. I'd like it tonight. He turned off the television. Why? Because those are my records. He sighed. You're making this sound strange. It is strange. Melissa entered the room. What's happening? I spoke carefully. I want access to my own papers. Melissa crossed her arms. Nobody is keeping them from you. Then give me the key. Brian stood. I said I'll find it. When? His jaw tightened. Why are you suddenly acting like this? I felt my heart beating. Because this is my house. Silence. A long silence. Melissa finally spoke. Nobody said it wasn't, but something in her voice had changed. For the first time, she sounded defensive. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked downstairs for water. As I passed the kitchen, I heard voices. Melissa and Brian were arguing softly. You said she wouldn't question anything. Keep your voice down. What happens if she talks to someone? She signed. I know, but... A chair moved. Footsteps approached. I hurried back upstairs before they saw me. The next morning, everyone behaved normally. Brian smiled. Melissa made breakfast. Lily remained quiet. But something had changed. The warmth that once filled the house had disappeared. Several days later, I walked outside to check the mailbox. When I returned, my front door wouldn't open. I tried the key again. Nothing. Brian opened the door from inside. Oh, I changed the locks. I stared at him. You what? The old ones were sticking. You changed every lock? We have extra keys. Where is mine? He hesitated. I haven't made yours yet. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I looked at my own front door. The same door David had installed. The same lock I had used for decades. And suddenly, a terrifying thought entered my mind. If I didn't even have a key to my own house anymore, what exactly did I still own? The dinner that changed my life began like dozens of other family dinners. Melissa made meatloaf. Lily set the table. Brian opened a bottle of iced tea. Outside, rain tapped against the kitchen windows, and for a few moments, the house almost felt normal again. Almost. I had spent several days thinking about the new locks, about the missing key, about the filing cabinet, about the conversation I had overheard. Most of all, I had been thinking about Lily's question. Did Mom and Dad ask you to sign house papers? I had decided that evening to finally ask directly. No more hints. No more silence. No more pretending. Halfway through dinner, I placed my fork down. Brian, have you found the key to my filing cabinet? Melissa stopped eating. Brian took a sip of tea. Not yet. It's been 2 weeks. I've been busy. I looked at him. I need my documents. Melissa forced a smile. Mom, why are you suddenly worried about papers? Because they're mine. Nobody spoke. The rain outside seemed louder. Brian finally leaned back in his chair. Everything is already taken care of. I frowned. What does that mean? Melissa looked at him. He looked at her. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Brian said something that made my blood run cold. The house is protected now. I stared at him. What house? Our house. The room became completely silent. Lily slowly lowered her fork. I looked at Melissa. What is he talking about? She avoided my eyes. Mom? No. My voice shook. What is he talking about? Brian stood and walked toward the kitchen counter. He opened a folder. The same blue folder I had not seen in months. He removed several papers and placed them in front of me. There. I adjusted my glasses. At the top of the page, I saw words that immediately made my stomach twist. Quitclaim deed. I looked down. My signature appeared near the bottom. My hand began trembling. What is this? Melissa spoke softly. You signed it. No. You did. I never signed this. Brian crossed his arms. You signed everything when Linda came over. I stared at the document. There was my name. There was Melissa's name, and according to the paper, ownership of my home had been transferred. My heart pounded. No! Melissa's eyes filled with tears. Mom, we explained everything. No, you didn't. You were worried about nursing homes. I never agreed to this. Brian's voice became firmer. You signed willingly. I pushed the papers away. I thought I was signing medical forms. Melissa began crying. We were trying to protect the house. The house didn't need protection. It did. No. My voice grew louder. It belonged to your father and me. Brian interrupted. And someday it would belong to Melissa anyway. I turned toward him. Someday is not today. Nobody spoke. The clock on the kitchen wall ticked. Lily stared down at her plate. I looked again at the deed. My signature appeared there, or something that looked like my signature. I honestly couldn't tell. My memories of that evening with Linda felt blurry. Pain medication, fatigue, pages, signatures. My breathing became shallow. Melissa reached for my hand. Mom, please calm down. I pulled my hand away. When exactly did this happen? A few months ago. You recorded this. Brian nodded. It was the responsible thing. The responsible thing. My voice cracked. You transferred my house without telling me. We told you. No. Melissa wiped tears from her eyes. You just don't remember. The sentence hit me harder than anything else. You don't remember. For a moment, I said nothing. Because older people carry a secret fear. The fear that perhaps we really are forgetting. Perhaps we missed something. Perhaps age is stealing pieces of us. And for one terrible moment, I questioned myself. Had I signed it? Had they explained it? Was I confused? Brian seemed to notice my hesitation. His voice softened. Erin, nobody is trying to hurt you. I looked at him. You called me Erin. He blinked. What? You never call me Erin. Melissa looked nervous. I suddenly realized something. Neither of them was speaking to me like family anymore. They were speaking to me like a problem, like paperwork, like a situation to manage. I stood slowly. This is my house. Melissa's face hardened for the first time. Legally, it isn't anymore. The room went silent. Even Brian looked surprised. The words had escaped before she could stop them. I stared at my daughter. The little girl who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. The woman whose wedding veil I had adjusted with trembling hands. The mother I had defended. The daughter I had trusted. Melissa. Her voice became cold. You signed the deed. I never agreed to give you my home. You already did. My eyes filled with tears. Why? She looked exhausted. Because we needed security. You needed my house. We needed family. You already had family. Brian stepped forward. Nobody is taking anything from you. I laughed bitterly. You changed my locks. That was temporary. You took my papers. We organized them. You recorded a deed. We protected the property. Every answer sounded rehearsed, as if these conversations had already happened between them many times. Lily suddenly stood. Mom, stop. Everyone looked at her. Tears filled her eyes. Grandma didn't know. Melissa turned toward her daughter. Lily, stay out of this. You know she didn't know. Brian's face darkened. Go upstairs. No. The room felt as though it might explode. Melissa began crying again. I can't do this. I looked directly at her. Did you know? She couldn't answer. That silence became my answer. For the first time, I realized something that hurt more than the deed itself. My daughter had known. Perhaps not everything. Perhaps not from the beginning. But she knew enough. And she chose to stay silent. I picked up the papers. My hands shook so badly that the pages rattled. I want copies. Brian nodded. Fine. I want my documents. Fine. I want my key. He said nothing. Melissa finally spoke. Mom, you're making this much worse than it is. I slowly turned toward her. Worse. She looked exhausted. This is our home too. And there it was, the truth, not hidden, not disguised, not wrapped in concern. Our home. Not yours. Our home. I suddenly understood why the locks had changed. Why the photographs disappeared. Why my mail was opened. Why the garage became an office. Why I no longer had passwords. Because somewhere along the way, they had stopped seeing me as the owner and started seeing me as the obstacle. That night, I locked my bedroom door. For the first time in my entire life, I was afraid inside my own house. And as I sat alone in the darkness, holding a copy of the deed in my trembling hands, one terrible question kept repeating inside my mind. If my daughter truly believed the house belonged to her, how long would it be before she decided I no longer belonged there at all? For 3 days after the dinner, nobody mentioned the deed. That silence frightened me more than the argument itself. Melissa acted as though nothing had happened. She cooked breakfast. She asked if I needed groceries. She watched television beside me in the evenings. Brian smiled. He talked about the weather. He discussed football. He asked Lily about school. The house felt strangely calm. Too calm. Because underneath every conversation sat a terrible truth. They believed the house belonged to them, and I no longer knew what rights I still had. I spent hours reading the copy of the deed. The legal language confused me. The signatures frightened me. There was my name. There was David's name. I stared at his signature repeatedly. Something about it bothered me. But grief plays tricks on memory. After 8 years, could I really remember exactly how David signed his name? Perhaps. Perhaps not. I wanted to call someone, a lawyer, the county office, a friend. But shame stopped me. How do you tell people that your own daughter may have taken your house? How do you admit that you may have signed away your home without understanding it? Older people carry embarrassment differently. We blame ourselves. We assume we should have known better. On Friday morning, I finally called Carol. She arrived within 30 minutes. We sat on the back porch. I handed her the deed. She read it slowly. Then she looked at me. Did you really sign this? I don't know. Erin? Tears filled my eyes. I honestly don't know. She reached across the table. You need legal advice. I can't afford a lawyer. You can't afford not to have one. I looked toward the house. Melissa stood at the kitchen window, watching us. When Carol left, Melissa approached me. What did Carol want? We talked. About what? The deed. Her expression immediately changed. Mom, why are you involving other people? Because I'm confused. We already explained everything. No, you didn't. Melissa folded her arms. What exactly do you think happened? I don't know. Do you think I stole your house? The question hung between us. I couldn't answer, because part of me did, and another part still couldn't believe it. That evening, Brian came home earlier than usual. His mood seemed tense. Melissa barely spoke during dinner. Lily looked terrified. After we finished eating, Brian placed several papers on the kitchen table. We need to talk. My heart began beating faster. Melissa sat beside him. I remained standing. Brian folded his hands. This situation can't continue. What situation? You questioning everything? I stared at him. This is my home. He sighed. Legally, the property belongs to Melissa now. It always belonged to me. It doesn't. Melissa began crying. I can't keep living like this. Living like what? Like you're accusing us. I felt my voice tremble. I'm asking questions. Brian leaned forward. You signed the documents. I never understood them. You signed them. I was injured. You were competent. I was medicated. He shook his head. That's not what happened. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Melissa said words I will never forget. Maybe it would be better if you stayed somewhere else for a while. The room became completely silent. I looked at my daughter. What? She wiped tears from her eyes. Things are too stressful. I laughed softly because surely I had misunderstood. You want me to leave? Temporarily. This is my house. Brian spoke calmly. Melissa owns the property. My entire body went cold. No. You need time to calm down. I looked toward Lily. She was crying quietly. I looked back at Melissa. You want your mother to leave her own home? She couldn't meet my eyes. I just need peace. The sentence hurt more than anything else. Not the deed, not the locks, not the papers. Peace. As if I had become the problem. As if my presence itself disturbed their lives. I went upstairs. I locked my bedroom door. For almost 2 hours, I sat on the edge of my bed. David's photograph sat beside me. Outside the window, darkness slowly covered the yard. I remembered bringing Melissa home from the hospital. I remembered teaching her to read. I remembered holding her hand after nightmares. And now, my daughter wanted me to leave. Around 10 o'clock, someone knocked. It was Lily. She entered quietly. Grandma? I wiped my eyes. Hi, sweetheart. She sat beside me. Please don't go. I hugged her. I don't know what will happen. She started crying. Dad says the house belongs to Mom. I closed my eyes. What do you think? She looked at me. I think Grandpa would be angry. Neither of us spoke. A few minutes later, Brian knocked. We need to talk downstairs. I followed him. Melissa sat in the living room. 2 suitcases stood near the front door. My suitcases. I stared at them. What is this? Melissa's face was pale. We packed some things. I couldn't breathe. You packed my clothes. Brian spoke calmly. Carol said you could stay with her. I looked at my daughter. You called Carol? We thought it would help. Help who? Nobody answered. I turned toward the staircase. I am not leaving. Brian's voice became firmer. Erin, this isn't helping anyone. This is my house. No. He pointed toward the deed sitting on the coffee table. That document says otherwise. For the first time in my life, I became angry enough to shake. My husband built this house. Your husband transferred it. No. Melissa finally stood. Mom, please. I looked directly into her eyes. Are you throwing me out? She began crying again. I don't know what else to do. And suddenly, I understood. She had already chosen. Perhaps weeks earlier, perhaps months earlier. But she had chosen. Her husband, the house, the security, the future she wanted. And I was standing in the way. I picked up my coat. I picked up my purse. I picked up one suitcase. Lily began sobbing. Grandma, please don't go. I hugged her tightly. I love you. Melissa cried. Brian opened the front door. Cold air entered the house. The same front porch where David and I had welcomed our daughter home from the hospital. The same front porch where Christmas photographs had been taken. The same front porch where my husband kissed me every morning before work. Now I stood there with 2 suitcases. Homeless. My own daughter closed the door. The sound of the lock turning echoed inside my chest. For several minutes, I simply stood there. I could not move. I could not cry. I could not breathe. Then headlights appeared. Carol's car. She stepped out and immediately wrapped her arms around me. Oh, Erin. I finally began crying. As she loaded my suitcases into her trunk, I looked one last time at my house. The porch light glowed softly. The curtains were closed. The home David built had become unreachable. Inside Carol's car, neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she asked quietly, Have you actually seen the original deed? I turned toward her. What do you mean? The real one. I have a copy. No. She shook her head. I mean the one filed at the county office. I stared through the windshield. For the first time in weeks, another possibility entered my mind. What if the paper they showed me wasn't the whole story? And suddenly, despite all the pain, one question began repeating inside my head. If David had been dead for 8 years, who exactly had signed David Price's name? I barely slept at Carol's house. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Melissa standing in the doorway while Brian held my suitcase. I heard the lock turning. I heard Lily crying. Most of all, I heard my daughter's voice. Maybe it would be better if you stayed somewhere else. At 70 years old, I found myself lying awake in my best friend's guest room, wondering how a mother becomes homeless while her daughter sleeps in her bed. Carol made coffee before sunrise. Neither of us spoke much. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon toast. Outside, frost covered the grass. Finally, she sat across from me. What are you going to do? I stared into my coffee. I don't know. You need facts. I have the deed. No. She shook her head. You have their copy. I looked up. What difference does that make? The original is recorded with the county. I remained silent. Carol continued. If something happened illegally, it will be there. The word illegally made me uncomfortable. Because even after everything, part of me still refused to believe Melissa had done something wrong. Perhaps she was confused. Perhaps Brian had convinced her. Perhaps there was some explanation. Perhaps. Around 9 o'clock, Carol drove me downtown. The county recorder's office occupied an old brick building I had passed hundreds of times during my years at the library. I had never imagined walking inside to investigate my own daughter. My hands shook as we entered. Several people waited in line. A young clerk smiled politely. How may I help you? I swallowed. I need a copy of a recorded deed. She asked for the address. I provided it. She typed for several moments. Then she turned toward the printer. Within minutes, she handed me several pages. This is the most recent transfer. I thanked her. Carol guided me toward a nearby table. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. I began reading. The legal language looked identical to the copy Brian had shown me. The property description, the transfer, the dates. Then my eyes reached the signatures. My own name, Melissa's name, the notary. And below them, David Price. My entire body became cold. I stared at the page. Then I looked again. David Price. I knew that signature. I had watched my husband sign thousands of documents during 42 years of marriage. Checks, tax returns, insurance forms, birthday cards, mortgage papers. Something was terribly wrong, because the date on the deed was 3 months earlier, and David had been dead for 8 years. I could not breathe. Carol reached for the papers. What is it? I pointed. My husband. She frowned. What about him? He died. She looked at the signature. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, Oh my God. My hands began shaking violently. The young clerk noticed. Ma'am, are you all right? I stood. Slowly, carefully. I walked back toward the counter. The clerk looked concerned. Can I help you? I placed the document in front of her. My husband died 8 years ago. She looked confused. I'm sorry. I pointed to the signature. This says David Price signed this deed. She studied the page. And he died. Her eyes widened. She looked again. When did he pass away? 8 years ago. She immediately became serious. I'll need to get my supervisor. Several minutes later, an older woman joined us. She introduced herself as Mrs. Parker. I explained. My husband had died. The property had been transferred. My daughter now claimed ownership. And according to the recorded document, David had signed the deed. Mrs. Parker reviewed the file. When did Mr. Price pass away? 8 years ago. She looked at the date again. The room felt strangely quiet. Finally, I asked the question that had been growing inside me since I first saw the signature. Who signed David Price's name? Nobody answered immediately. Mrs. Parker spoke carefully. We only record documents that are submitted. But who signed this? We don't verify signatures. I felt dizzy. Carol touched my arm. I looked again at the signature. David always wrote his capital D with a long upward stroke. This signature did not. David's writing leaned slightly left. This one leaned right. The more I looked, the more certain I became. My husband had not signed this document. He could not have, because he was buried beside the church cemetery nearly 8 years earlier. Mrs. Parker asked quietly, "Do you have a death certificate?" "Yes." "You may want to speak with an attorney." Attorney. The word suddenly felt real. Until that moment, part of me still believed this was some misunderstanding. But a dead man had apparently transferred my home. There was no misunderstanding, only questions. Many questions. Who prepared the deed? Who notarized it? Who submitted it? Did Melissa know? Did Brian forge it? Did Linda witness it? Or had someone else signed David's name entirely? Outside the office, I sat on a bench. The cold air stung my face. Carol remained beside me. After several minutes, she asked softly, "What are you thinking?" I stared at the traffic. "I'm thinking about David." "What would he say?" I laughed bitterly. "He'd probably say I should have listened to him." The memory returned immediately. Never sign papers you don't understand. People change when money gets involved. At the time, I thought he was worrying unnecessarily. Now his words felt almost prophetic. My phone suddenly rang. "Melissa." For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Then I answered. "Mom?" Her voice sounded anxious. "Where are you?" "I went downtown." "What for?" I remained silent. She continued. "Please come home so we can talk." Home. The word hurt. I went to the county office. Silence. Long silence. "What did you do?" I took a deep breath. "I saw the deed." Another silence. Then Mom. "Melissa." My voice trembled. "Your father has been dead for 8 years." She didn't answer. I continued. "Who signed David Price's name?" I heard breathing. Nothing else. "Melissa." Still nothing. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Carol looked at me. "What happened?" She hung up. We sat there for several minutes. People passed. Cars moved. Life continued. And for the first time since I had been thrown out of my own home, something changed inside me. The fear began disappearing. The guilt began disappearing. The doubt began disappearing. Because older people often blame themselves first. We think, maybe I forgot, maybe I signed, maybe I misunderstood. But a dead man cannot sign legal documents. And suddenly, I realized something important. I was not losing my mind. I was not confused. I was not imagining things. Someone had lied. Someone had forged. Someone had stolen. The question was no longer whether my house had been taken. The question had become far more frightening. How many people knew exactly what had happened? As Carol drove us home, I looked out the window. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stronger than grief, stronger than fear, stronger than betrayal. I felt anger, and I finally understood why David had wanted to protect me. Because the greatest danger had never come from strangers. It had walked through my front door, wearing my daughter's face. The morning after I visited the county office, I took David's death certificate out of the small cedar box where I had kept it for 8 years. I had opened that box only a handful of times. The day I received his military service papers, the day I changed our insurance, the day I filed his final taxes. Every document inside represented loss. Now, for the first time, those papers might also represent protection. Carol sat beside me at her dining room table. "Do you know a lawyer?" I shook my head. "I've never needed one." She reached for her phone. My niece used a woman named Rebecca Collins during her divorce. I almost laughed. I'm 70 years old. I never imagined I'd need an attorney because of my own daughter. Carol squeezed my hand. None of us imagined these things. The appointment was scheduled for the following afternoon. That night, Melissa called 6 times. I answered only once. Her voice sounded exhausted. Mom, please come home. I don't have a home. Please don't say that. What should I say? She began crying. I never wanted this. I closed my eyes. Did you know about Dad's signature? Silence. Melissa. I don't know what Brian handled. The answer frightened me. Because it wasn't no. It wasn't impossible. It wasn't Dad never signed anything. She only said she didn't know. I felt suddenly very tired. You need to tell me the truth. I am. No. My voice trembled. You aren't. She started crying again. I love you, Mom. I looked at David's photograph sitting beside the bed. I loved you enough to trust you. The line became quiet. Then she whispered, Please don't hire a lawyer. That sentence told me everything. The next afternoon, Carol drove me to Rebecca Collins's office. The building stood near downtown Greenville. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and old books. I almost turned around twice. Lawsuits belonged to other families. Fraud belonged to newspapers. Forgery belonged to television. Not us, not Melissa, not my family. A woman in her late 50s entered the room. She wore a navy suit and silver glasses. Mrs. Price. I stood. I'm Rebecca Collins. Her office felt warm and calm. She offered coffee. I declined. My hands shook too badly. She folded her hands. Tell me everything. And for nearly an hour, I did. David's death, Melissa moving in, the conversations, the papers, the signatures, the locks, being thrown out, the recorded deed, David's name. Rebecca barely interrupted. She took notes. When I finished, she sat quietly for several moments. Then she asked, When did your husband die? 8 years ago. And the deed was executed recently? Yes. She looked directly at me. Your husband obviously could not sign the deed. Hearing another person say those words made my eyes fill with tears. Because until that moment, part of me still feared I was exaggerating. Rebecca continued. Did you knowingly transfer your property? No. Did anyone explain that the papers involved ownership? No. Were you taking medication? Yes. She nodded. Did a notary witness the signatures? Her name was Linda Foster. Rebecca wrote it down. Did your daughter know? I hesitated. I don't know. She studied me carefully. You still want to protect her? I lowered my eyes. She's my daughter. Rebecca's voice softened. And you're her mother. That doesn't change facts. For the first time in weeks, someone spoke to me as though I wasn't confused. Not elderly, not forgetful, not emotional, simply truthful. She opened a file. We need documents. What kind? Everything. She began making a list. David's death certificate, medical records, prescription information, copies of the deed, property tax records, the original house documents, bank statements, text messages, emails, witnesses. I looked up. Witnesses. Anyone who saw what happened. Immediately I thought of Lily, but she was 17, a child. I couldn't involve her, could I? Rebecca spoke carefully. Did anyone ever hear conversations about the signatures? I remained silent. Then, my granddaughter. She nodded. How old? 17. Did she witness anything? I don't know. Rebecca closed the folder. We won't pressure anyone. After the meeting, I sat in my car, feeling strangely lighter. For weeks, I had been drowning in uncertainty. Now there was structure, evidence, questions, possibilities. As we drove home, my phone vibrated. A text message. Lily. Grandma, can we talk? My heart immediately tightened. I waited several minutes before responding. Of course. She asked if she could meet me at the small coffee shop near her school the following day. I agreed. The next afternoon, she arrived wearing her school sweatshirt. She looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. The moment she sat down, she began crying. Oh, sweetheart. She shook her head. I hate this. I reached across the table. You don't have to choose sides. They keep fighting. Who? Mom and Dad. My heart sank. About what? She looked around to make sure nobody was listening. Dad said you ruined everything. I remained silent. He said the lawyer changes everything. My stomach tightened. The lawyer. That meant Brian knew. He was worried. Lily wiped her eyes. I heard them talking. When? The night before you left. I held my breath. What did you hear? She looked terrified. Dad was practicing Grandpa's signature. For several seconds, I could not speak. The sounds of the coffee shop disappeared. People talking, dishes, music. Everything faded. What? He had papers. My voice barely worked. Are you sure? She nodded. He asked Mom if it looked right. Tears rolled down her face. Mom told him to stop. My heart pounded. When was this? Months ago. Did your mother know? She looked down. I think she thought he already had permission. I closed my eyes. The room felt cold. Lily continued. When you started asking questions, Dad became angry. She wiped her face. He said once the papers were filed, it wouldn't matter. My hands trembled. Rebecca had asked whether there were witnesses. Now there was one, and she was my granddaughter. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to take her home. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to carry this burden. Instead, I asked, would you tell the truth if someone asked? She looked directly at me. Yes. That answer both comforted and broke me. Because the child in our family had become the bravest person among us. That evening, I returned to Rebecca's office. I told her everything. She listened carefully. When I finished, she closed her notebook. For the first time, she said, we have a witness. I looked at her. What happens now? Rebecca leaned back. We gather evidence. And then, her expression became very serious. Then we find out exactly who forged David Price's name. For the first time since losing my home, I felt something I had not felt in many weeks. Hope. Not because I believed justice would be easy. Not because I believed Melissa would suddenly tell the truth. But because somewhere beneath all the lies, the real story still existed. And for the first time, we had begun to uncover it. 3 days after my meeting with Rebecca Collins, my family stopped speaking to me. Not completely, but enough to make the silence feel intentional. Melissa no longer called. Brian never left messages. Only Lily sent occasional texts. Are you okay? Did you eat? I miss you. Those 3 simple messages often made me cry. Carol insisted I stay as long as necessary. She prepared meals. She left blankets outside my bedroom door. She never pushed me to talk. At 70 years old, I found myself depending on the kindness of a friend because my own daughter had closed her door. The humiliation was difficult to explain. People imagine losing a home as a financial tragedy. Sometimes it is something worse. It is losing the place where your memories live. Rebecca called the following Monday. I've requested several documents. What happens now? We wait. I hate waiting. I know. Her voice remained calm. Brian will eventually have to explain David's signature. That thought became my only source of strength, because no matter what anyone said about my memory, my age, or my health, one fact remained impossible to change. David had been dead for 8 years. 2 days later, Melissa appeared at Carol's front door. I almost didn't answer. She stood alone. No Brian, no Lily, only my daughter. She looked exhausted. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. Can we talk? Carol quietly left us alone in the kitchen. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Melissa stared at her hands. I never wanted this. I felt suddenly tired. You've said that. Tears filled her eyes. Brian says you're trying to destroy us. I looked at her. I lost my home. She shook her head. The house is ours now. Those words hurt more than I expected. Ours. Not yours. Not mine. Ours. I leaned back in my chair. When did you stop thinking of me as your mother? She began crying. Please don't do this. No, Melissa. Answer me. She couldn't. I continued. Did you know your father's signature was on that deed? Her breathing became uneven. I didn't ask questions. I closed my eyes. Why? Because we needed help. You needed money. We were desperate. You could have asked. We did ask. No. My voice rose. You asked to stay here. She looked away. Brian had probably coached her. Perhaps they had practiced these conversations. Perhaps they had repeated the same explanations over and over. But suddenly she said something unexpected. Brian said it was legal. I looked at her. What? He said transferring the house would protect everyone. Did he tell you Dad signed it? She hesitated. That hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like years. Finally, he said there were old documents. My stomach tightened. Old documents. Not impossible. Not Dad couldn't sign. Only old documents. Rebecca had warned me. People often protect themselves by avoiding the truth. If Melissa never asked questions, she never had to hear answers. Before she left, she stood beside the door. Please stop the lawyer. I stared at her. Did Brian ask you to say that? She remained silent, and silence became another answer. The following week became one of the loneliest periods of my life. Word had begun spreading among relatives. My sister called. Melissa says you're confused. An old cousin called. Are you having memory problems? A church friend asked if I had considered assisted living. Someone had started telling a story, and in that story, I was an elderly widow losing her memory. Not a woman who had been betrayed. Not a homeowner who had been deceived. A confused old woman. That hurt almost as much as losing the house. Because age can become a weapon. People hear words like dementia, confusion, memory loss. Suddenly, everything you say becomes questionable. Rebecca invited me to her office again. She had obtained copies of medical records from the time I signed the papers. She spread several documents across her desk. You were prescribed pain medication. Yes. Were you taking it regularly? Every day. She nodded. That matters. I looked at her. Why? Because capacity can become important. I hated the word capacity, as if my life had become a legal measurement. Rebecca continued. I also found something else. She handed me a document, the notary log. Linda Foster had recorded the signing. My name appeared. David's name appeared. I stared at the page. How? Rebecca removed her glasses. That's exactly the question. I looked down. The signature line beside David's name had a notation. Present. Present. My husband had apparently attended a signing 8 years after his death. The absurdity almost made me laugh. Instead, I cried. Rebecca handed me tissues. I'm sorry. I shook my head. I keep thinking this isn't real. It is. What if nobody believes me? She looked directly at me. Evidence doesn't care who people believe. That sentence stayed with me, because for weeks I had lived inside emotions, fear, shame, guilt, doubt. Now there were facts, death certificates, dates, records, witnesses. The truth was slowly becoming visible. 2 days later, Lily called. Her voice shook. Grandma! Sweetheart, what's wrong? I heard Dad yelling. My heart sank. At who? Mom! I remained silent. He said if you win, everything is over. Win. The word sounded strange. Families shouldn't have winners. Families shouldn't have cases. Families shouldn't have evidence. But here we were. Lily lowered her voice. Mom cried. What happened? Dad said you were turning everyone against them. I sat quietly. Then Lily asked something that broke my heart. Are you still my family? I immediately began crying. Oh, sweetheart. Because Dad says you're trying to destroy us. I wiped my eyes. You listen to me. She remained silent. I will always be your grandmother. She started crying too. Promise. I promise. That evening, Carol found me sitting outside. The sun had almost disappeared. David used to love sunsets. He said they reminded him that endings could still be beautiful. Carol sat beside me. What happened? I told her about Lily. She sighed. Children always suffer first. I looked toward the sky. I never wanted this. I know. I would have helped them. She nodded. I know. And that was perhaps the deepest wound. Had Melissa simply come to me and said, Mom, we're drowning. Mom, we need help. Mom, we're losing everything. I would have given her everything I had. Money, savings, the house itself someday, anything. Instead, they chose deception. And deception changes love. Because love can survive mistakes. Love can survive anger. Sometimes it even survives betrayal. But trust once broken rarely returns unchanged. As I prepared for bed that night, Rebecca sent one final message. We are preparing legal action. For several minutes, I stared at those words. Legal action. Against my daughter. Against my son-in-law. Against the people who once sat around my kitchen table. I turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room. And for the first time since losing my home, I realized something painful. The coming battle would not determine whether I loved Melissa. I always would. The real question was whether Melissa had loved me enough to tell the truth, and I still didn't know the answer. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. For 3 nights beforehand, I barely slept. At 70 years old, I had attended funerals, hospital appointments, and my husband's final days. I had stood beside a grave and said goodbye to the man I loved. Yet walking into a courtroom to face my own daughter frightened me in a way I could not explain. Rebecca met me outside the courthouse. She carried 2 large folders. "How are you feeling?" I laughed softly. "Terrified," she nodded. "That's normal. I don't want to fight Melissa. I know. I only want the truth." Rebecca looked directly at me. "Then that's what we're here for." The courthouse itself felt cold. Gray walls, wooden benches, quiet conversations, people carrying files, lives being argued inside small rooms. Carol sat beside me. She had insisted on coming. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." I squeezed her hand. Across the hallway, I finally saw Melissa. For a moment, my heart forgot everything. She was still my daughter, still the little girl who once held my hand crossing streets, still the teenager whose hair I braided before school dances. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen. Beside her sat Brian. He wore a dark suit, calm, composed, almost confident. When his eyes met mine, he looked away. Melissa stood. "Mom!" Rebecca gently touched my arm. "Not yet." The hearing took place in a small courtroom. The judge appeared older than I expected. He spoke calmly. "No drama, no television speeches, just facts, documents, questions, truth." Rebecca organized our materials. Across the room sat Brian's attorney. That fact alone nearly broke my heart. My daughter and son-in-law had hired a lawyer against me. The proceedings began. The judge reviewed the property, the dates, the transfer, the deed. Melissa's attorney spoke first. He painted a simple picture: an elderly widow, estate planning, a loving daughter, a voluntary transfer, a misunderstanding. He even used the phrase, "Mrs. Price may have forgotten the circumstances." Forgotten. The word made my chest tighten. Rebecca remained calm. When it was her turn, she stood. "Your Honor, Mr. David Price died 8 years before this deed was executed." The courtroom became quiet. She handed documents to the judge. David's death certificate, hospital records, the date of death. The judge looked down, then at the deed, then back again. Rebecca continued. "The document contains Mr. Price's signature." Nobody spoke. The silence felt enormous. Finally, the judge looked toward the opposing attorney. "Can you explain that?" The attorney adjusted his glasses. "We believe the signatures were properly executed." Rebecca walked toward the evidence table. She held up the deed. "Your Honor, this signature appears on a document dated 8 years after Mr. Price's death." The judge looked toward Brian. For the first time all morning, my son-in-law appeared nervous. Melissa lowered her eyes. Rebecca then called Linda Foster, the notary. She entered the room looking pale. I recognized her immediately. The woman from my dining room table. The woman who had smiled politely while I signed papers. She took the oath. Rebecca approached slowly. "Ms. Foster, did you notarize this deed?" "Yes." "Did you witness the signatures?" "Yes." Rebecca placed the death certificate before her. "When did Mr. David Price die?" Linda looked down. "I don't know." Rebecca spoke quietly. "He died 8 years before this deed was signed." Linda swallowed. The courtroom became completely silent. Rebecca asked the question that stopped everything. Did you personally watch David Price sign this document? Linda froze. Several seconds passed. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Finally, no. The word echoed through the room. My heart nearly stopped. Rebecca remained calm. Then why does your notary record state that Mr. Price was present? Linda began crying. I didn't check everything. Rebecca's voice became sharper. You certified that he personally appeared before you. I trusted the paperwork. Who gave you the paperwork? Linda looked toward Brian. Only for a moment. But it was enough. Brian suddenly shifted in his chair. His attorney stood. Objection. The judge allowed Rebecca to continue. Did Mr. Brian Carter provide these documents? Kel. Linda hesitated. Yes. The room felt cold. I looked toward Melissa. Tears rolled down her face. She still wasn't looking at me. Rebecca approached the bench again. She produced the notary log. Your Honor, the notary record lists Mr. Price as present. The judge examined the page. Then he looked directly at Linda. Did you knowingly certify a deceased individual as present? Linda started crying. No. Then how did this happen? She shook her head. I made a mistake, but everyone in that room understood something important. Dead men do not accidentally attend signings. Mistakes do not create signatures. Someone had made choices. Rebecca called me next. My legs trembled as I walked forward. I took the oath. She asked gentle questions. My marriage, David's death, my fall, the medication, the papers, the locks, being removed from my home. At one point, she asked, Mrs. Price, did you knowingly transfer your property? No. Did anyone explain that you were signing a deed? No. Were you aware that your husband's signature appeared on the document? No. My voice broke. I believed I was signing medical paperwork. The courtroom remained quiet. Then Brian's attorney stood. He asked whether I sometimes forgot appointments. Yes. Whether I took medication? Yes. Whether I had experienced grief after my husband died? Yes. His questions felt designed to make me seem confused, old, fragile. At one point, he asked, Is it possible you simply forgot signing the deed? I looked directly at him. No. He paused. How can you be certain? My voice trembled. Because my husband was dead. The courtroom became silent again. Even the judge looked down. When I returned to my seat, Carol squeezed my hand. Rebecca leaned toward me. You did well. But the hearing wasn't over. As proceedings continued, I noticed Melissa crying quietly. Brian spoke to his attorney. He looked angry, not frightened, angry, as though someone had ruined his plans. Near the end, the judge spoke carefully. There are serious concerns regarding the validity of this transfer. He requested additional evidence, further review, more documentation. No final ruling yet. But something had changed. The deed was no longer treated as truth. It had become evidence, possible fraud, possible forgery, possible deception. Outside the courtroom, Melissa finally approached me. Mom. I looked at her. She was shaking. I didn't know. I wanted to believe her. God knows I wanted to. But another question remained. If she hadn't known, why had she let me sleep at someone else's house? Why had she locked the door? Why had she allowed Brian to call the house theirs? I simply asked, When did you stop believing me? She started crying again. I was scared. Before I could answer, Brian appeared. His face was pale. His confidence had disappeared. Rebecca stepped beside me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of losing the house, not fear of losing money, fear of the truth. Because one question had changed everything. Who signed David Price's name? And now the entire courtroom wanted the answer. After the hearing, everything changed. For months, Brian had acted as though he controlled the situation. He controlled the paperwork. He controlled the house. He controlled the conversations. But once the judge questioned David's signature, the confidence disappeared. People often believe the truth arrives suddenly. It doesn't. The truth arrives slowly, piece by piece, one broken lie at a time. Rebecca called me the following Monday. We received additional records. What kind? The notary's communications. I sat upright. Emails. Yes. My heart began beating faster. Did they say anything? There are references to Brian. I closed my eyes. For the first time, someone outside our family had connected his name to the documents. No longer suspicion, no longer fear. Evidence. Rebecca continued. We're requesting more information. Does Melissa know? I don't know. That question continued haunting me. Did Melissa know? Or had she spent months convincing herself not to know? 2 days later, my phone rang. Brian. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But eventually, I pressed the button. His voice sounded different, not confident, not calm. Erin? He had never called me Erin before all of this. What do you want? We need to talk. We already did. This has gone too far. I laughed softly. You threw me out of my house. It wasn't like that. Really? He became quiet. We can settle this. The word settle made me uncomfortable. How? You stop the case. I stared through Carol's kitchen window. Outside, the trees moved gently in the wind. And then, you move back. My heart stopped. What? We can work something out. I suddenly understood. He was afraid. Not because he missed me. Not because he regretted anything. Because he was losing. Who signed David's name? Silence. Long silence. Finally, I didn't force anyone. That's not what I asked. His breathing became heavier. Melissa was trying to protect you. Who signed my husband's name? The line went dead. I lowered the phone. Carol looked at me from across the room. What happened? He hung up. She nodded slowly. Guilty people often do. Later that afternoon, Lily arrived unexpectedly. She stood outside Carol's front door carrying a backpack. Her eyes were red. Sweetheart? She immediately hugged me. I had a fight with Dad. I brought her inside. Carol made hot chocolate. For several minutes, Lily simply cried. Finally, she spoke. Mom knows? The words felt like ice. What do you mean? She wiped her eyes. She knows Dad signed Grandpa's name. I couldn't breathe. No. She didn't know at first. I remained silent. But she knows now. My hands trembled. When? The night after the hearing. I sat down. Lily continued. They argued. What did they say? Dad said the signature didn't matter because you signed too. My eyes filled with tears. And your mother? She asked him why he did it. The room became silent. Everything inside me hurt. Because for months I had protected Melissa inside my heart. I had imagined her manipulated, confused, pressured. But now another possibility appeared. Perhaps she had learned the truth and chosen silence. Perhaps she had known before throwing me out. Perhaps she had looked directly at the forged signature and still locked the door. Lily lowered her voice. Dad said if he went down, everyone would go down. Everyone. I looked at her. Did your mother answer? Tears rolled down her cheeks. She just cried. That evening, Rebecca arrived at Carol's house. She carried several documents. For the first time since meeting her, she looked angry. What happened? She sat down. The notary changed her statement. I looked up. What? She now says Brian brought the documents already prepared. Carol gasped. Rebecca continued. He told her David had signed earlier. I closed my eyes. Earlier. As though death could be scheduled conveniently. As though 8 years meant nothing. Rebecca placed another document on the table. There's more. I looked down. It was a copy of an email. Brian had written, everything is already signed. We only need Erin to finish her part. My hands began shaking. Finish her part. I remembered the medication, the pain, the papers, the signatures. I had never been the beginning. I had been the final step, the last signature necessary to transfer my home. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Finally, I asked, Does Melissa know about this? Rebecca hesitated. I don't know. But Lily did. And perhaps that was enough. The following morning, my phone rang again. Melissa. I answered. Her voice was barely audible. Mom. I waited. She started crying immediately. I need to see you. Part of me wanted to refuse. Another part still heard her first word. Mom. We met at the church parking lot, neutral ground, the same church where David's funeral had taken place. Melissa looked older, smaller, as if several years had passed in only weeks. She sat inside her car. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, I know. My heart hurt. When? She closed her eyes. After the hearing. About the signature. She nodded. I felt tears coming. And you still let me leave. She started crying. I didn't know what to do. You could have told me. I was scared. You could have opened the door. She covered her face. I thought Brian would fix it. The words hurt because they sounded honest, weak, human, cowardly, but honest. I looked at my daughter, the woman I had loved her entire life. Did you know before? She shook her head. No. Are you sure? I swear. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to. But trust does not return simply because someone cries. Finally, she whispered, He said if the house stayed in your name, we'd lose everything. I looked down. So you chose the house? No. Then what did you choose? She couldn't answer, because perhaps she still didn't know. As she left, she turned toward me. I never wanted you to leave. I felt tears running down my face. But you watched me go. She began crying again. And suddenly I understood something terrible. Sometimes people do not become evil. Sometimes they become afraid, and fear convinces them to stay silent while terrible things happen. That evening, Rebecca called one final time. "We have enough evidence. What happens now?" Her voice remained calm. "We move forward." I sat quietly. Outside, the sun disappeared behind the trees. For the first time in months, I thought about David. Not his death, not his illness, but his strength. He had built our house board by board. He had protected me his entire life. And now, somehow, even after death, he was still protecting me. Because the one signature Brian thought nobody would question had become the very thing destroying his lies. And as I prepared for bed that night, I realized something. The house had never belonged to greed. It had never belonged to deception. It had never belonged to fear. It belonged to truth. And the truth was finally coming home. The final hearing took place 6 weeks later. By then, spring had begun arriving in Greenville. The trees outside Carol's house carried small green leaves. The air felt warmer. People planted flowers. Life moved forward. But inside me, time still felt frozen. I had not returned home. Melissa and I spoke only twice. Brian had disappeared almost entirely. Lily continued sending messages. "I miss you. Mom cries every night. Dad sleeps in the basement. Families break quietly. Most people never see it happen." Rebecca met me outside the courthouse. She carried fewer files this time. Her expression seemed calmer. "Ready?" I looked at the building. "No." She smiled gently. "That's probably a good sign." Inside the courtroom, everything felt different. The confidence Brian once carried had vanished. His attorney looked tired. Melissa appeared pale. She sat alone. Brian sat several seats away from her. Even before the hearing began, I understood something. Their marriage had changed, perhaps permanently. The judge entered. The room stood. Then everyone sat. Rebecca spoke first. She presented the additional evidence. The emails, the notary statements, the timeline, the medical records, the death certificate. The judge reviewed everything carefully. Then Brian was called to testify. For the first time since this nightmare began, he sat alone. No explanations, no interruptions, no Melissa, no confidence, only questions. Rebecca approached him. "Mr. Carter, did you prepare the deed?" "Yes." "Did you provide it to the notary?" "Yes." "Did you know David Price was deceased?" He swallowed. "Yes." The courtroom became quiet. Rebecca continued. "Then why does his signature appear?" His attorney objected. The judge allowed the question. Brian looked down. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Finally, "I copied it." My entire body went cold. Even though I already knew. Even though we all suspected. Hearing the words aloud felt like being struck. Rebecca remained calm. "You copied David Price's signature." "Yes." "Why?" He closed his eyes. "I thought it would simplify things." Simplify. The same word, the same excuse. Everything had always been for my benefit, my protection, my security, my future. And now forgery had become simplification. Rebecca asked, "Did Mrs. Price know?" He hesitated. "No." "Did Melissa Carter know?" Another silence. This one lasted much longer. Finally, not at first. I turned toward my daughter. She began crying immediately. The judge looked at Brian. When did she become aware? He lowered his head. After the deed was filed. My heart broke, because suddenly I understood. Melissa had not started the lie, but she had chosen to live inside it. Rebecca asked one final question. Did Mrs. Price knowingly agree to transfer her home? Brian looked exhausted. No. The room became silent. For months, I had doubted myself. For months, I wondered whether age had stolen my memory. For months, I feared I had become confused. And now, finally, the truth sat openly inside the courtroom. No confusion, no misunderstanding, no forgotten conversation, only deception. The judge recessed briefly. Everyone left the room. I sat quietly beside Rebecca. Melissa approached slowly. Her eyes were swollen. Mom. I looked at her. She fell to her knees. People turned toward us, but she didn't seem to care. I'm sorry. Tears filled my eyes. She continued crying. I was afraid. I said nothing. I thought if I told the truth, I'd lose everything. I looked at her. And what did you lose instead? She covered her face. Myself. Those words hurt because they were true. For months, she had been trapped between loyalty and honesty, between her husband and her mother, between fear and truth. And every day she chose silence, until silence destroyed everything. Brian remained on the other side of the hallway, alone. For the first time since meeting him 15 years earlier, I saw not confidence, but defeat. Perhaps he finally understood. He had not only risked legal consequences, he had destroyed his family. The judge returned. Everyone sat. His voice remained calm. The deed was declared invalid. The transfer was void. Ownership returned fully to me. Additional matters involving the forged signature would be referred for further investigation. I heard the words, but they did not feel real. After everything, after losing my home, after sleeping in Carol's guest room, after doubting my own memory, after hearing my daughter ask me to leave. The house was mine. It had always been mine. Tears rolled down my face. Carol squeezed my hand. Rebecca smiled. You won. But the word felt wrong. Won. What exactly had I won? My house. Yes. The truth. Yes. But my family. That was more complicated. Outside the courthouse, reporters were not waiting. No cameras. No headlines. Life continued normally. Most family tragedies happen quietly. Melissa approached me again. I left Brian. I looked at her. When? Last week. I remained silent. He moved out. The news surprised me. Perhaps it shouldn't have. Some lies survive. Others collapse under their own weight. She wiped her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at my daughter. Older now. Smaller. Broken. Neither villain nor victim. Simply human. I don't know what comes next. She nodded. I'll wait. Lily suddenly ran toward us. She threw her arms around me. Grandma! I held her tightly. For the first time in months, 3 generations stood together. Broken. Hurting. But together. As the sun began setting, I finally returned to my house. Carol drove me. Rebecca followed behind. Melissa remained several steps away. The front yard needed work. The roses had grown wild. The porch light was burned out. Everything looked familiar and strange at the same time. I walked toward the front door. My hand touched the doorknob. The same door, the same house, the same home David built. But before entering, I stopped. I turned toward Melissa. She stood crying quietly beside Lily. And for the first time since this began, I asked the question that had lived inside my heart. "Do you want to come inside?" She looked shocked. "After everything..." I felt tears in my eyes. "You're still my daughter." She began sobbing, and as the evening sun touched the front porch, the door that had once closed behind me slowly opened again. Not because the pain was gone, not because trust had returned, but because healing like truth often begins with a single step. And this time, we were finally walking toward it. The first night back in my house, I slept in David's old recliner. Not because I had nowhere else to sleep. My bedroom was exactly where I had left it. My bed remained made. My books still sat beside the lamp. My robe still hung behind the door. But the house no longer felt the same. Homes remember things. And my home remembered betrayal. The silence felt different. Every room carried memories of the months I had lost. The kitchen where the deed had been placed before me. The living room where Melissa asked me to leave. The front door that had closed behind me. Even the staircase seemed to remember my tears. Carol stayed with me that first evening. She helped me open windows. We changed the sheets. We made coffee. At sunset, she stood beside the front porch. "You okay?" I looked toward the maple tree David had planted. "No," she smiled gently. "Good." I laughed. "What kind of answer is that?" "The honest kind." She hugged me. "Healing takes longer than winning." After she left, I walked through every room alone. The garage still contained Brian's desk, his boxes, his files, the office he built inside David's workshop. The sight made me sad rather than angry, because greed had not only stolen my peace, it had stolen years that my husband and I had built together. The next morning, I began cleaning, not because the house was dirty, because I needed to reclaim it. I removed Brian's desk. I opened every window. I washed dishes. I dusted photographs. I reorganized David's tools. Hours passed. For the first time in months, I felt useful. In the garage, I found David's old toolbox. Inside lay his measuring tape, his work gloves, a folded note. My hands trembled. The paper had yellowed with age. In David's handwriting, it said, "For Erin, if something breaks, fix it slowly." I sat down and cried, because somehow my husband had left me exactly the advice I needed, not only for the house, for my heart. Several weeks later, Rebecca helped me establish a living trust. She sat beside me in her office. "This protects your wishes," I signed carefully. Every page, every paragraph, every line. I read everything. When I finished, Rebecca smiled. "Your husband would approve." I smiled through tears. "I think so." The trust guaranteed that I would remain in my home for the rest of my life. After my death, the house would eventually pass to Lily. Not immediately, not through pressure, not through fear, through love. When I told Lily, she cried. "I don't deserve that." I touched her hand. "It's not a reward." "What is it?" "It's trust." She hugged me tightly. By then, Melissa had moved into a small apartment across town. She and Brian had separated. He faced legal consequences involving the forged documents. I rarely asked about him. Some stories end with villains punished dramatically. Real life is quieter. People live with consequences, Sometimes those consequences last longer than sentences. Melissa began attending counseling. Lily told me. Mom cries a lot. I nodded. So do I. One Sunday afternoon, Melissa called. Would you have dinner with me? I sat quietly. For months, I had imagined this conversation. Part of me wanted to refuse. Part of me still heard her crying outside the courthouse. Whenever you're ready. Readiness is a strange thing. Sometimes it never comes. Sometimes we choose it anyway. A week later, we met at a small restaurant. Neither of us ate much. Melissa looked older, not physically, spiritually, as if guilt had become something heavy she carried every day. She folded her hands. I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at my daughter. You've said that before. I mean it. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, Do you hate me? The question broke my heart, because mothers rarely stop loving their children, even when they want to, even when they should. No, she began crying. I hate myself. I reached across the table. Don't. How can you say that? Because I know what fear does. She looked down. I should have told you. Yes. I should have opened the door. Yes. I should have believed you. I nodded. Yes. Tears rolled down both our faces. Finally, she whispered, Can you ever trust me again? I thought about David, the house, the courtroom, the locked door, the little girl who once slept beside me during thunderstorms. Trust is not a light switch. It returns slowly, carefully. Sometimes it never fully returns. I don't know. She nodded. That's fair. Several months later, I invited Melissa and Lily for dinner. Only them. No Brian. No lawyers. No documents. Just family. I cooked David's favorite roast chicken. Lily made dessert. Melissa brought flowers. For the first time in over a year, we sat around my kitchen table without fear. The conversation felt awkward, then easier, then normal. At one point, Lily laughed. The sound filled the house, and suddenly I realized something. Healing had quietly entered the room. Not because we forgot, not because the pain disappeared, but because we finally told the truth. After dinner, Melissa helped wash dishes. She stood beside me at the sink exactly as she had when she was 12 years old. Mom. Yes. Why did you forgive me? I dried a plate. I haven't finished yet. She looked surprised. I smiled gently. Forgiveness is a journey. She nodded. But I started walking. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone on the front porch. The same porch where I once stood holding a suitcase. The same porch where my daughter closed the door. The same porch where Carol found me crying. Now the air felt warm. The porch light glowed softly. David's maple tree moved gently in the wind. I finally understood something my husband had tried to teach me years earlier. Love does not require surrender. Kindness does not require blindness. Family does not erase boundaries, and forgiveness does not erase consequences. I still miss David every day. I still think about those terrible months. I still wake up sometimes hearing the lock turn. But I also hear Lily laughing. I hear Melissa apologizing. I hear Carol telling me to heal slowly. Most of all, I hear David. This house keeps you safe. He was right. Not because of walls, not because of documents, not because of deeds. Because this house reminded me who I was. A wife, a mother, a grandmother, a woman who survived grief, a woman who survived betrayal, and finally, a woman who came home. Life teaches us that the people we love can sometimes hurt us the most. Trust is precious, especially within families, and once it is broken, rebuilding, it takes honesty, courage, and time. Growing older does not mean becoming powerless. Age does not erase wisdom. It does not erase dignity. No one should ever feel pressured to sign documents they do not understand, no matter who asks them to do so. Love and boundaries can exist together. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself. You can open your heart without surrendering your security. And you can love your children while expecting them to be accountable for their actions. Erin's story reminds us that truth may arrive slowly, but it eventually finds its way into the light. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it comes quietly through one question, one witness, or one act of courage. Most importantly, healing does not mean forgetting. Healing means carrying the pain differently. It means allowing hope to return even after betrayal. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone you loved? What would you have done in Erin's situation? Please like and subscribe if stories like this speak to you, and don't forget to tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Your experiences and voices may help someone else feel less alone.